2012. I don't mean to interrupt you. Since you mentioned 2012, the next question is about 2012. Have you considered the possibility of multiple realities and the role multiple realities will play as the 2012 consciousness shift accelerates?
No, that's not something I've looked into at all. I mean, my focus on 2012 is not even so much the physical date. It's the process, it's the cycle leading up to it. Because remember, at every point in life, the future is what you create in the now. So there's a lot of attendant New Age type philosophies about what might happen, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
These don't interest me at all. I'm interested in the cycle of the last the 13-year cycle of the countdown, because this is corroborated in my own form of astrology, in astrology in general, in the countdown to the so-called Age of Aquarius, and also in much more subtle theories pertaining to the life cycle of the ego, which is somewhat spoken about in the Vedic tradition when they speak about the yugas, opening and closing, and so forth and so on, and also ultimately from a psychological point of view. I don't rule out anything, but I'm very, very aware of the escape mechanisms that people are hoping to not do any inner work, no shadow work, and just wait for some sort of, euphoric thing to happen at a particular date. This is misreading of the subject matter. So no, I haven't given that any thought.
Since you study the occult, I always say this almost in every show, but the 11-year solar cycle, back in 1990, September the 11th, George Bush 41 said that we need a new world order. Fast forward to September the 11th, 2001, we know what happened. And then fast forward to the fall solar equinox of 2012. That would be the next solar cycle. What is the correlation between these three 11-year cycles?
Well, the sun rules everything. The physical orb up there and the sunspots is an enormous importance. And therefore, like we said, nature has its own ordinances, its own rhythms and cycles. Those rhythms and cycles are articulated to consciousness. Because whether we realize it or not, our very cells, our very DNA, the mitochondria, the biological rhythms of the body. I mean, people doubt this. They know that when a group of women get together, their menstrual cycles will all equalize.
Interesting.
Yeah. When a group of women get together, their period cycles equalize. They happen exactly at the same time. Right? So, therefore, and that's why people get flus and colds. It's not because there's some bug going around like we've been misinformed. It's because when you're in the public, a certain frequency, which is known as the immune system, again, we have a false understanding of what that is. It's basically a frequency level, all even out. So if you're around other people with a low immune system, your immune system, if you're perpetually around people, will go low, and therefore you will then catch a proverbial cold, even when days before you were perfectly normal.
So you're saying that you're tuning to that frequency,
yes,
as opposed to catching a cold.
Right. It's harmonics. It's the fluctuation of the immune system, which is a very complex thing. We have a very standardized and fixed Lego set idea of a lot of these things. But basically, the immune system is a very subtle thing. It's like a sort of a radar. And therefore, it will acclimatize to the other people around you. And if their immune systems, which is mostly the case because they're eating wrong and they're drinking wrong and their attitudes are wrong or their mentality is wrong, and you hang around them, inevitably, this is a phenomenon known as when you get the cold. It's partly to do with it. It's certainly not to do with some pathogenic bug going around that everybody uses as phraseology. It's utter nonsense. It's to do with the fluctuations of the immune system and the moods and the whole matrix of subtle connections that we have to everybody else. And then taken up the fractal even higher. Because in my work I talk about the inner zodiac. I don't even acknowledge the fact that there's a zodiac upon which the sun moves, if you really get down into it, and nor do I accept that the sun itself, the sun of course has physical factors, but the sun represents something very, very powerful, inwardly, psychologically, and therefore the Maya priests knew this, because all shamanic classes will eventually come upon this knowledge. That's why it's esoteric in nature, and that's why it's not for all the people of the world, because they simply don't have the understanding of this. You have to work it up. You have to study a lot to understand these principles of how material, how consciousness, and matter, which appear to be two different things, but they're not, interact with one another. And therefore, those cycles that appear to be on the calendar, those cycles that appear to be happening in the zodiac, are actually articulated through consciousness. And the Maya ancient priests, knowing this, weren't really talking about the movement of the sun and the zodiac and Venus. They were just using those as metaphors, if you will. It's just like notes on a sheet of music are not the music itself. You have to play the music on the piano or the guitar. That's the real music. And therefore, the music is experience. The music is the psyche. The music is the life of an individual or the mass of individuals.
The manifestation.
Music, yeah. The sheet music is the, metaphor, which is, okay, the sun's going to be here in 2012, will happen, this, blah, blah, blah. That is just the outward expression of the script that the Magi have. They have the inner script of it, but then the play that they arrange so that you'll know that. In fact, this is how the zodiac was created. The ancient shaman realized that when they were teaching people about the various proclivities of the human psyche, they weren't getting very far because people couldn't get it. So then they said, well, look, you guys are farmers. Do you see how your goats will do this? Or do you see how the sheep will do this? Or do you see how the lion comes down as a predator and does this? Or do you see how the bull will operate? And they go, oh yeah, we get it now. And they say, well, okay. Then they point to the heavens and say, those constellations, right? There's the bull, there's the ram. It was just sort of like kindergarten. But what was being explained behind that was immensely deep. It was to do with the nature of an individual, the zodiac being basically an expression, a template of man's psyche. So the same thing applies to anything that has to do with prediction. So my work, it's different in 2012, is that I don't actually even really believe in prediction. Not in the hardcore way that most people, accept it. Prediction is absolutely predicated upon what you do in the moment. That's why we go into this, for instance, in my mystery school and also in the time gnosis project that I work with. Everything that you do and everything you will do, everything you will become, and every outcome is actually seated in the very moment that you live in right now. To give you a very concrete example, is that say somebody wants to know, hey, I'm trying to get into this relationship, or I'm thinking of buying this shop, or listen, I'm thinking of moving house, or I'm going to start a big set of conferences, or I'm going to launch my movie, or I'm going to send my kid to this school or whatever. What will be the outcome? Will it be good? And everyone has this traditional idea of doing a predictive chart in order to say, oh yeah, here's the outcome, like you're gazing into some crystal ball.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, the answer is actually located in the very moment in which the idea arises to you. And I mean, when I talk about that, I mean astrological timing. And once you know that astrological timing, and you know the right way to decode it, which is what we do on time gnosis, that is the whole secret right there. There's no sense of prediction. And of course this ties well in with science, because science now, with its theory of the still point and their theory of the singularity, most of the people who work with me on time gnosis and who belong to it are actually high-level scientists, because this particular aspect of numerology and of prediction fits precisely with their theories in the quantum understanding of life. Whereas other forms of astrology, they turn off because it doesn't sound right. Scientists will not buy into it, and that's why scientists have habitually not bought into astrology, because the astrology is the one that's a mistake. And no scientist of credibility, see, is going to believe in some magic rays floating from rocks in space affecting your consciousness. My system wasn't based on that, and so therefore I've had tremendous success with people from a very high level of science, buying into what I'm doing and going, this is really accurate, Michael. So this is the concept, and it goes up the fractal when we talk about 2012. Everything that man has done, everything that man has been doing in the last decades, everything they did at the turn of the century, everything that he did, in the 1960s, everything that he has done, and everything that he's doing now is the consequence of what will happen later on. And the sun is a symbol for that consciousness. It's a symbol for all of the people's mass consciousness. And therefore its movement through the 12 signs of the zodiac, very much in the same way as the trials of Hercules, or the trials of Jason and the Argonauts, or we have it in Irish legends as well, with and English legends of the Knights of the Round Table and what have you. This is all understandable and decodable using mythological language and using symbolic tropes. It's not so much about physical time and just simply waiting for a change to take place, which is again a cop-out, which is what people are doing.
And since you mentioned mythology, and this is one of the most fascinating things, the next question. During your Atlantis presentation, you said you believed that Lemuria and Atlantis existed at the same time. However, many believe that the civilizations of Lemuria and Atlantis existed during two different cycles. Do you still believe that they existed during the same cycle?
Well, I'm no expert, but I've looked at all the theories, and I even know people who are very, very adept at studying this Lemurian epoch. And they swear blind that it's much more antique and more ancient. However, from my researches, and again, you come at this stuff from different angles and you follow different threads. As far as my research is concerned, they existed coterminously, and I even have the idea that Lemuria came later. That Lemuria was actually the homeland, the true homeland of humanity, which is actually what the word means, by the way. And Atlantis was an experiment, an alien experiment, that kind of went wrong. And then the Lemurian idea. But again, these are just terms, these are just words. The word Lemuria, for instance, turns up in the most ancient Irish mythology as Murias. It's a very ancient name. And it's certainly one of the lands that the ancient Irish say that they descended from and they came from. And there was many that were ruined or wrecked, or as the myths and legends say, lost beneath the waves, you see. So much of this. And Atlantis is even a generic term when it really comes down to it. It's so connotative. In one sense, you can think of the whole planet was Atlantis, if you will. So again, you know, it's sort of splitting hairs, and everyone's free to come up with their own interpretation. I've written my levels of interpretation of what I've studied all my life, and I present that to the world. But it's really for the reader to read all the other stuff. Read the Blavatskys, read the Ignatius Donnellys, read the Commons Beaumonts, read the Zacharias Sitchins, you see, and read even the modern stuff that's come out now, the research from other teachers and researchers, and form their own theory about
be exposed to different perspectives and draw your own conclusions. That's exactly what I say all the time. Now, this one, are there any details in your research that would suggest that they had high technology and high spirituality? And this is a good question, because from what I've learned, most of our planet's problems are caused due to the separation of technology, or let's call it what it is, science and spirituality.
Yes, there's no doubt about it. In fact, I bring up that very heavily in my Atlantis book. It is slanted towards evidence pertaining to that subject. Evidence from the Mahabharata, evidence from the Ramayana, evidence from the Vedas and the Edda of Norway, of the northern countries, from the Celtic myths and legends. There's enormous anecdotes about this. And I mention all of this. A lot of this is not known even to Celtic scholars, or they dismiss it. And so I bring it up in the books. And people can read that as actually being physical technology if they wish, which I really think it was. Or they can read it as some sort of commentary, symbolism. And it could be a bit of both, you see. Because remember, it's all-encompassing. So when they talk about Cuchulainn, the great hero of Ireland, having some sort of power that when he walked into the water would boil all around him, that can be taken as the falling of a comet into the water. Right? And since he was also known, he was sort of a feathered serpent character, we can also say the feathered serpent is these flashing comets. So there's one body of mythology that says it's all that, it's commentary, it's cosmological. But yet at the same time, we do know that in Tibet, and great mystics have in fact the power to melt ice when they sit down, or when they sit to meditate. This is exactly what happens. And then we find out
their mind?
Yes. Using their mind, using just the chi, the energy flow of their body. I mean, Bruce Lee had some of these powers. We know they exist. And therefore, then we find out that Cuchulainn's other name, his more ancient name, is Setanta. Set and Anta. These are very Eastern names. So we have to then have an eclectic mind that can understand that in the ancient mind, when the mind was whole, not divided as it is today, the view of the world was very different than it is today. And there was nothing that was dead in the cosmos. And so there were people saw the movement of water, or they saw the creation of a volcano, or they saw some sort of cosmological event. This was intimately connected into their very intimate lives, and was in some sort of weird way personified in their daily lives. And so, like I said, I'm not an expert. Everyone has to go to this phenomena and decide for themselves how to pick it apart and say, oh, I really think this was legitimate. Because, in fact, one of the great heroes of Ireland, he was actually the Sun King of Ireland. When he came out on his chariot, for instance, during this great battle, his countenance was so bright that the assembled heroes said that they thought that the sun had risen in the west. So right there, you have many commentaries involved in one. You have both an astrological, right, anecdote about the fact that, hey, maybe there was something to do with the polar shifts of the earth, or maybe the sun did appear to rise in the west, you see, so then somebody can go and chase that. And there's been people who've written marvelous works on just that fact by taking pieces of this mythologies. For instance, Immanuel Velikovsky is the one that jumps to mind, but there's been many others who've taken what appears to be cosmological anecdotes within the mythologies, and they've been able to reconstruct a great deal of history from that. then somebody else will come to the same myth and say, no, that's a comment on the Great One. Because after all, Lu, the sun god, was the Lion King. He was the man who was effulgent. He was the master of all the arts. He was the perfected one. He was the illumined one. He was the Christed one. He's the one who could conquer all evil. So his light outshines the physical sun. That's beautiful. That's fantastic. And this is picked up then, you see, in the stories and mythologies of all the races in the world, where you'll see the sun kings always haloed by the sun, and so forth and so on. It's not that a real child stands on the head of a bull, like you see Horus. It's not that a real Aphrodite rose from a physical ocean. It's not that a physical Arthur pulled a physical sword from a stone. It's symbolic. And we're going to have almost zero understanding of our lives in the world unless we tap into this knowledge. So Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung always said the myth is going on perpetually whether you know it or not. See, in my work I always try to draw on personal anecdotes and help people to see that this myth is going on continually. It's going on all the time in what might be called synchronicities and serendipity and surreptitious things that take place. But it's invisible to the most of people of the world. And then when I get into my really deep occult work with my mystery school, I emphasize to those members that, look, if your mind is shut off to that level of communication, you are deeply vulnerable to the architects of control. I'm not into divination because I love tarot cards or have nothing better to do and just be reading tea leaves. I'm not interested in it for those reasons. I'm interested in it because I understand that this is the only way to open that archetypal ancestral voice that was available to our ancients. Because if a man wants to really change the status quo, he must first change himself. He must change his thinking. And he must gain psychic sovereignty and psychic immunity. And he's not going to be able to do that through the normal bastions of education in this world. Nor is he going to be able to do it by talking to his mates down at the pub and watching the blinking TV. He's going to have to enter in, whether he likes it or not, to a whole world that has now been appropriated and plagiarized and cannibalized by the very controllers that we've been discussing, and I discuss and reveal and expose in my work. And if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for you, and it's only people's own ignorance that stops them from doing this. They need to be able to understand why J.P. Morgan said, yes, the millionaires do not use astrology, but the billionaires do. Wink, wink, nod, nod, nudge, nudge. He's letting you know why they have the power that they have. And therefore that archive of knowledge, in Michael Tsarion's opinion, is not theirs. They don't even deserve it. It's mankind that deserves it. This is an archive for them. And therefore, within that is the techniques to gain the symbolic literacy, to cast down the veils of ignorance, which is all too growing, ever darker, like Professor Tolkien said. The shadow of Mordor is spreading throughout the world, is casting its shadow over the minds of every human being. One can sleep at night with this? One can tolerate it? Or one is going to get serious about doing something? People have spilled their blood for the royal families of the world. They've fought for a flag and nation. They believe propaganda. Families have been massacred for what? A mere national debacle? A mere national or tribal skirmish?
That would go back to the hive mentality. There's the queen and everybody else is a slave, basically.
Right. And yet people, right, well, exactly, but people have gone out there and willingly shed blood for these demiurges, these demagogues. I'm talking about consciousness here. What blood do you want to spill to own your own mind, to be a sovereign, free individual as you have been born on this planet? And whether that you like it or not, that's going to take you into spiritual fields, but it's also going to take you into material fields. It'll take you into legal fields, because a part of sovereignty is legal sovereignty. It's going to take you into a re-understanding of education. Do you want your children to be going to the mind control schools? No, you don't. So then you have to now investigate something else. Do you want them to be eating garbage? No, you don't. So then you're going to have to discover something more about food and nature, you see? And so on and so forth. And as we said at the beginning, make this an adventure. Make it a delightful thing.